So welcome, everyone, to the new zoo at Elk Grove webinar Zoom meeting that we are holding this evening to go over the financing plan and have a public meeting in order to review the financing plan for a new zoo at Elk Grove. I am Jason Lindgren, I'm your city clerk, and I'll be assisting along with many other staff to make sure that we have this webinar environment operating and going forward at full functionality. So folks know this webinar is being recorded, and after the conclusion of the webinar, we have 2 hours slated for this evening. We will post this up to the zoo website and have that available for folks along with any of the materials that we had presented. Really, these webinars are intended as information sharing, and so we like to get into a little bit about kind of the housekeeping of this process. Is that at the beginning of the meeting, the staff will be presenting information about the financing plan, background about the zoo, and what you will see in the webinar environment is that video and audio, for the most part, is disabled. It's really intended for us to share the information, but we do want to hear questions and see where we can help direct you to the information to provide answers. So what you'll see in your webinar environment is a little button for the Q&A. When you go down to that button, that gives you an opportunity to submit a question. And what we will be doing as staff is, after we make it through the presentation, intended as the first part of the evening tonight, we will go into the Q&A period where staff will put together the questions, make sure where we have duplicates that we're not asking the same questions over and over again. And remember, this is being recorded. So for any questions, if you did ask it, but it got answered earlier, but you just happened to step out of the webinar environment, we can get back to the recording and you'll be able to get back to some of those answers. So with that, that's just part of the housekeeping as we move forward, and we'll continue on with the presentation.
All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jason Behrmann. I'm the city manager for the city of Elk Grove, and it's my privilege to be with you this evening and be able to share some information about the zoo project. Most specifically, we're going to focus on kind of the financing element, which is an element that we've just recently put together in the last month or so, and we've been doing our best to get information out of the public about what that is, what that means for the city in the short term as well as the long term. And then present that information. We already presented the information at the Planning Commission meeting. We're presenting it again at the City Council meeting coming up. But this is an opportunity for us to, again, share the information with members of the public, take those questions, be able to share some our answers that we might have on that, and then get into some of those details that I know members of the public are anxious to learn about and explore. So this is just a brief overview of the agenda. We're going to again, provide some information about the project and the financing, talk a little bit about the next steps, what that means, what's coming up. And in the Q&A section that Jason Lindgren just mentioned, we are recording this tonight, so it'll be available. And everything related to the zoo is on our website. So you can see the URL right there, elkgrovecity.org/zoo. So it's been up there. It will continue to get updated as additional information becomes available, or a new Q&As that come out that we want to make sure that the community has an opportunity to see. We'll continue to post it up there. So that is kind of your zoo central hub of information to go to at any point. So with that, again, welcome. Thank you for being here and taking the time as we explore this with you. I'm going to turn the time over to Christopher Jordan, who's our Director of Strategic Planning and Innovation, has been leading this zoo effort. So Christopher, I'll leave it to you.
Great. Thank you, Jason, and good evening, everybody. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the project introduction for us all. So for those of you that have not had a chance to see all the details as the project's been coming together over the last several months or 2 years, you get a sense of what's going on there. And then, as Jason said, we'll get into the financial stuff. I'll be joined by Matt Paulin, our finance director, will help walk through some of that information for you this evening. So in terms of a little bit of a background about the Sacramento Zoo, as we've talked about over the last couple of years, the existing zoo, Upland Land Park, opened in about 1927 on about 4 acres of land. Today it covers about 14.5 acres with about 380 animals across 94 species. It's been operated since 1997 by the Sacramento Zoological Society, a nonprofit organization who took over operations from the city of Sacramento. They do operate the zoo as an accredited facility under the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and that's important in terms of recognizing the care and maintenance of the animals and the overall species preservation for those species that are within the collection. Those existing facilities that are at the Land Park site do not meet the current AZA guidelines. Those guidelines are constantly being updated based upon the needs and care quality for animals Certainly, while the zoo does a fantastic job of taking care of the animals that are up there in the collection today, those new guidelines and new requirements do require for changes to those facilities and really expansion of what needs to happen up there. And so over the last 20 or 30 years or so, the Society with the City of Sacramento has looked several times at opportunities for expansion or relocation. None of those have been identified as opportunities within the City of Sacramento. Expansion at Lamb Park was not identified to be viable because it impacts the adjoining neighborhood, the loss of existing recreational facilities within the zoo, or within the Lamb Park area, and then impacts the existing residences and a school that's directly behind the zoo today. An alternative location has not been selected by the City of Sacramento at this time. They've looked at a number of locations, including North Natomas, a couple of different golf course sites around the City of Sacramento, and a few other places. As we've been going through this process to understand why we would undertake this project or consider it, a couple of items come up as part of that conversation. First, the understanding of why zoos matter in the first place. There's a lot of reasons for this that really boil down to what we think about in terms of three key areas of conservation, education, and recreation. In the case of conservation, helps preserve those endangered species that exist through programming and advocacy and research for them, and helping folks to understand the importance of the conservation of those species and how they are impacted through whatever changes are occurring in the world or impacts that are happening to them. From an education standpoint, for folks to have a greater understanding of the variety of animal species, foster an appreciation for those, and overall appreciation for the natural world. And then finally, in the case of recreation, that this provides really a safe, interactive, and unique experience and opportunities, particularly for family fun, as an opportunity for residents. There are a number of city goals that the project would align with. First, the council adopted goals around having a vibrant community, the attraction and expansion of nonprofit businesses, enhancing experiences for residents and visitors, and overall high-quality design. In terms of the city's economic development objectives, this lines up well with lifestyle amenities, visitation opportunities, marketing and branding, and regional leadership. Within the city's overall comprehensive plan or general plan for the community, we have a number of policies that align with the project. This includes our vision statement about Elk Grove being a great place to make a home, a great place to work, and a great place to play. Also around our language that's in the general plan about being a family-oriented community, plentiful in parks, that we aim to become a center within the larger region, providing opportunities for employment, recreation, education, retail, industry, and residential development. And some of the specific policies that we can point to in the general plan today talk around our regional collaboration in Elk Grove being an opportunity to invest in public infrastructure and the ability to provide community facilities. So as we mentioned, it's been a several-year process to get where we are today. This effort started in about the summer and fall of 2021 when the Society approached Elk Grove to discuss opportunities for potentially partnering and relocation of the zoo facilities into Elk Grove. That was memorialized with an exclusive negotiating agreement that we announced in September of 21. From there, the city had started looking at property acquisition opportunities and moved forward with the acquisition of a candidate site for the facility. We completed a feasibility study that we presented back in the spring of 2022. The council reviewed that in March and gave staff direction to move forward with continued design development and understanding about what the project could look like, in completing conceptual and schematic design and environmental review and preparing a financing plan. We've done all that now from the summer of 22 through last fall. We've completed that design work and released for public circulation or public review the environmental impact report. This winter, we finished up the financing plan, and we are now at the place of spring of 2024 to look at potential approval of the project by the City Council. All right, just a second. So now I'm going to go into a little bit of the project design, again, just to give folks an understanding of what is going on with the project and how we've designed this. So we have the proposed location is at the northwest corner of Camera Road and Lots Parkway. This is a location that's about 100 acres or so in total size. It's directly across the street from the Sterling Meadows subdivision and is located at south end of the city in proximity to Highway 99, Camera Road, with some good access and circulation. As we've gone through the design process with our design team, we spent a lot of time to understand the surrounding characteristics and environment that the project could be located within, looking at those connection opportunities to adjacent development that are either exist today or in construction now, the proximity of those residences, what the impacts could or could not be from operations and access and control into the site, where parking would need to be, and just sort of a whole number of other issues that come with looking at a project like this. And I won't go into all the details today. Again, there's a lot of materials up on the website. For those of you that have joined us for the Planning Commission meetings or at other presentations we've done on the project, we've got a lot of other information out there. But just some things I want to highlight in terms of the design. In terms of access, we see the primary access from the site being from Camera Road. Most folks will come regionally from along Highway 99. In the future, as Camera Road connects to I-5, that's another connection opportunity. But we'll direct folks to take Camera Road to get to the sites and then to turn onto Lots Parkway, where they'll come up a few hundred feet to what we call Classical Way. It's an existing street that's in Sterling Meadows. It would extend to the west across the project site, and then drivers would then go through a series of roundabouts that would then take them directly into dedicated parking for the zoo. We've designed those intersections to provide for very clear and easy movement and prioritize the movement of people arriving or exiting from the zoo so we can get them out very easily and quickly and efficiently. The intent there is to really reduce the impacts to the Sterling Meadows neighborhood to the east. As I mentioned, there's dedicated parking for the zoo itself. We've broken this up into 2 parking fields on the north side of Classical Way and directly at the arrivals plaza and main entrance into the zoo, or the entrance into the zoo would be about 530 parking stalls. Per our calculations, this would serve the need of parking for about 75% of the year, of the open days throughout the year that the zoo would be operational. For the other 25%, there's an overflow or expansion lot, or the south parking lot, we call it, the south of Classical Way, that would provide about another almost 1,100 parking stalls down there. And so between those two, we're able to build out the ability to support about 1.6 million visitors annually. In early phases, there'll be a lower number that we expect to occur annually. And so we've laid out the parking, got about 1,600 total spaces, ADA stalls, about 34 in total. Those are all prioritized in the north parking lot. This is higher than what the building code requirements are going to be. Standard requirements would be for about 1.7% of the total spaces. We're at about 2. We also have dedicated EV charging spaces of 80 with expandable up to 327 in future phases. And then we've got dedicated bicycle parking, about 120 stalls for bicycles. That's also higher than what our minimum obligation would be of about 5%. This slide shows the overall site plan build out. In total, about 63 acres would be developed in what we call inside the fence line for the zoo itself, with all the various design elements. I won't spend a lot of time on this because there's a ton of detail, and you can visit the plans themselves up on the website. Again, everything's up there. You can go through. There's hundreds of pages of design documentation to showcase all of this. But in terms of how we think about the ability to develop the site, both in terms of the mechanics and then the cost and the financing around it, we really see the opportunity to phase this thing. So in terms of phasing, we've broken it up broadly into 4 phases, phases 1 through 4. And then in terms of phase 1, we're already looking at 3 sub-phases, what we call phases 1A, 1B, and 1C. Phase 1A and 1B is what we'll talk about when we get to the financing plan in a little bit. Phase 1A and 1B focuses on African species. This includes giraffe, lion, cheetah, okapi, gelada monkey, rhino, and various hoofstock, and a number of other species in there as well. It also includes the arrivals plaza, the main entry, guest services, 2 main restaurants, the Gelada Cafe and the Giraffe Lodge Cafe, as well as a beer garden. There's other amenity and facilities throughout the complex. And so that core 1A, 1B gives us most of those main facilities necessary to operate the zoo. Also gives a major utility corridor around the backside where the main utilities and service access would exist. Access to the site overall. The animal care center is also within there for veterinary care and nutrition services, and some other back of house support services. Phase 1C, which is not included in the financing plan today, is an expansion of Africa. This could include various great apes, hippo, additional rhino habitat, wild dog, and hyena. Phase 2 is proposed for a California-specific area. Phase 3 would actually relocate administrative offices that in phases 1A and 1B would be modular buildings into a permanent building up by the main entry. And that would then free up space over in phase 4 for what we're calling Australasia, or species that you would expect to see in the Asia and Australia continents. So in terms of the phasing for phase 1A, 1B, and what that site plan would look like, here's a snapshot of that. Through the corridor, we've got, or through the middle of the site is that red area, we call it the green corridor. That essentially is sort of the main pedestrian spine that runs through the site. It connects you from the arrivals plaza to sort of a fun center in the back where you've got the carousel, train ride, and then the gelato cafe. As I mentioned, there's a second restaurant, which is up at the front, actually. That's the Giraffe Lodge. That restaurant's designed to both serve people that are inside the zoo, you have a ticketed experience, as well as folks that would come to the zoo in order to experience it for the day, or to come to the restaurant and want to experience just the restaurant, and you'd still be able to have opportunities for views out over the savannah. Some of the design elements I'll highlight. Here's an image of the proposed entry complex. So here we've tried to create architecture that lays out really in keeping with sort of broadly a design motif that you would expect to see sort of in Elk Grove, creating this canopy structure where you've got what appear to be trees, but it's structural steel that is able to hold up that entry canopy within view sheds looking out over into the first of the savannas. As we think about the characteristics for how we design the animal spaces and the people interaction and viewing opportunities into those animal areas, these diagrams and some of the photos here give you some inspiration about what that would likely look like. Along the top, we can see the entry plaza. So right as you come in through the main gate, you're presented with views out over the first savanna and seeing the giraffe that are across the savanna there. And as you continue on across that expanse, behind it would be, in this particular example, the lion copy or the lion rock formation. As the second habitat area, they're not connected together. There's a moat and barriers to keep the lions and the giraffes separated, the hoofstock separated from each other. But it gives you a very immersive experience to see across that savanna and really get an experience of what you would almost see like if you were on an African safari. So again, we've got a ton more information and details that are up on the website. I'll also highlight we've got a great partnership through this project with the Franklin High Full Stack Developer Club. They've gone through and put together, in partnership with our design team, a 3D model and video fly through so you can actually take a look at what the facility could look like and really understand some of the spatial arrangements. This has been a great tool as we've been working through the design and thinking about the various view shed access and opportunities, what that guest experience is going to be, how animal handling is maintained. And so we want to share this with everybody so you can actually go on the website, you can check out the YouTube video that's there. There's also an interactive version of the model. It does take a while to load, but it is really great once you get in there and you can walk around the site and really experience it for yourself. Okay. At this point, we're going to move on to financing. Before I hand it over to our finance director, Matt Paulin, I just want to go through a little bit on the construction cost side. So again, the financing plan that we're presenting at this point is focused on phases 1A and 1B. And to do that, we've laid out the cost for that into sort of two buckets: on-site cost and off-site infrastructure. The on-site cost includes the zoo facility itself, again, what we call essentially inside the fence line, all of the buildings, animal care facilities, holding areas, and all of that. It then also includes all the back of house stuff, all of that. It also includes then the parking facilities that are outside the fence line. And so those are then differentiated between the zoo facilities and the other cost. The other cost also includes various impact fees and other costs that are associated with construction in terms of impacts and things we would pay for, mitigation cost, and so on. The offsite infrastructure includes the roads, the extension of Classical Way, B Drive, which is a street that would be along the west side of the project, coming down out of the Sousa Dairy development from the north, widening of Lots Parkway to a 4-lane facility, and some other roadway improvements along Camera Road to provide for access and circulation improvements. It also includes water and sewer and other dry utility infrastructure connections to the site. And then we break out those costs into 4 categories of cost. First is the construction estimate itself. That's the actual labor and materials charges in order to construct the zoo. We then have a contingency line because the design level that we're at, the plans that we prepared at this point, only have a certain level of detail to them. So we plan for that contingency as we refine those plans and add additional detail through the process. We then have the soft cost piece, which is essentially those costs that are design services, testing and inspection services, permitting cost, impact fees and so on that would go into the overall cost of the project. And then the last category is escalation. And so here we've priced everything based upon the cost as we know them today. We know that it will be some time before we're able to get into construction, so we can use a methodology to then extrapolate what those costs are going forward. So that brings us to a total cost for the project of about $302 million. That's broken down into about $258 million for the on-site cost and about $44 million for the off-sites. So at this point, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how the project could be funded.
Thank you, Christopher. Appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Paulin, the city's finance director. So in order to fund that cost that Christopher just outlined, we have a diverse number of funding sources that can go towards the construction of the new zoo. So you can see it outlined here on the table. I'll be going over each one of these categories. The first one is development impact fees. The city will be the developer for the purposes of this project. So some of the improvements are eligible for reimbursement under our fee programs, mostly for roads, but also for water and sewer. We do have a cash on hand that we can use towards the project. I'll go through those sources in the city pay-go category. We also have partnerships with the Zoological Society and the community that we'll go over through the community partnerships. And what's left over will need to be bond financed. So that's that very precise number that you see on your screen before you is the remainder of that $302 million number. Next slide, CJ. So I mentioned the cash on hand, what we're calling pay-go sources that we're going to use towards the zoo project. So the first bucket that you can see in the table in front of you are the funds that we have in the general fund, which is our main operating account. So the city has saved money for many years towards opportunities such as this. And so we have a rainy day fund, which in the general fund, a rainy day reserve fund, which is not included in these amounts. So we have funds segregated in capital reserve, economic development fund, and our general fund opportunity reserve. On all of these figures that you see in this table are as of the end of the last fiscal year. So cash that the city has on hand. We also have, as many of you may know, that we have an agreement with Wilton Rancheria where they submit payments to us. Some of them are for just 5 years and others of them are in perpetuity. So they're broken out into different buckets for different uses. You can see here that we get payments for roadway improvements. We also get payments that are called tax and lieu payments, which are basically general funds that can be used for any purpose. And we get community facilities payments that can be used for community facilities. So we want to use the first 3 years of those. The tax and lieu payments are in perpetuity. So we're going to use 3 years worth of those payments towards our cash on hand. And then when I go over the debt service slide, you can see that we start using that revenue source towards the anticipated debt service for the project. We also have some community facilities districts funds that are eligible to be used on this project. These funds are above those what we need for any city projects and or debt service in the Poppy Ridge and Laguna Ridge CFD areas. And we also have a couple of other smaller pots. Measure A is a transportation sales tax that we could dedicate towards, use towards the projects. And we're going to have to plant some trees at the zoo. So we've got some tree mitigation fee funds that we can devote towards the project. Again, this is all funds that we have on hand. So on the partner funding piece, so we have $80 million planned in the financing plan to come from, first of all, going in kind of opposite order of the table from the Zoological Society. This is a $50 million obligation. That's the sole responsibility of the Zoological Society, presumably to be got through fundraising or other capital raising efforts. We anticipate that we're going to have opportunities for animal care and energy efficiency. So in partnership with the Zoological Society, we will go after funds that we can use for those key functions of the zoo. So when I talked about that $114.5 million remainder after using all those fund payment sources, that we've got about $114.5 million left. And so looking at the current interest rates for tax exempt financing, looking and assuming our current credit rating, which is AA for the city, it's about 4.25% interest rate right now. We're cautiously optimistic that the Fed will decrease interest rates, even though inflation seems to be pretty stubborn. But if those interest rates do go down, of course, our debt payment will go down. There's a nice table in the financing plan that gives you a sense of if interest rates do go down, what this payment ends up decreasing to. But how would we support that payment? It's really important to note that the Zoological Society, there's a theme here in this financing plan, that's a shared responsibility. So they would share in the debt service payment, $2.5 million set payment per year until the debt is paid off. The city would cover the remainder. And all of these funds are really funds that have been freed up through actions that the city has taken over the last several years. This first source is the casino annual tax and lieu payments I just talked about. Those are funds that we're getting from Wilton Rancheria that we're going to start using that in perpetuity towards the debt service payment. The second one here is the revenue neutrality payment. That's a payment that we make to the county as part of our annexation agreement with them from our property tax revenues. That agreement will be fully fulfilled here in the next couple of years. So that'll be revenues that we'll have freed up here at the city side to devote towards the debt service. We did have a sales tax sharing agreement with the Costco project. We paid that off, and so that freed up additional funds that we could devote towards debt service. And finally, we have debt service on the City Hall building that matures here in a couple of years, again, freeing up funds that we can devote towards the debt service. So again, that 7.8 odd million is assuming we need to finance 114.5 million, and at today's tax exempt interest rates at about 4.25%. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, that it's a really diversified financing plan, and it's a shared responsibility, not all on the city's shoulders. So excluding those development impact fees I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, our cost share is about 57%. And then when you take the casino funds into account, it's less than 40% of that total financing plan. So well diversified funding plan that's shared amongst various parties. And a couple of key points that I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of was that this financing plan, we don't anticipate that it's going to impact any city services. There's no Measure E funding or new transactions and sales tax. That is not anticipated to be part of the financing plan at all. And no tax increases are needed. Again, we've got the funds on hand for a big piece of it, that shared debt service and those partnerships that I talked about and the opportunities will go a long way towards funding this first phase of the zoo. Does a project like this have risks? Yes, of course it does. We've thought a lot about those and taken those account. You can see them outlined here. As we all know, inflation has affected a lot of different things, including construction costs. Interest rates could, although we think they're going to decrease, they could increase at some point. There's a lot of challenges with a project this complex and multi-layered with delivering this. Those discretionary reserves that I talked about, those numbers were indicative at the end of the last fiscal year. That is all of those reserves at that point in time. So we'd be all in on this project for those funds that we had at the end of the last fiscal year. And securing partner funding, that's a big lift for all of us involved, but one that we're ready for. On the management side of things, talking about additional cost estimates, we can keep updating those cost estimates to make sure that we're capturing what's going on in the construction industry and with the project in particular as we go. We are pursuing legislation in Sacramento to hire a construction management firm that we can more effectively and efficiently manage the project, because time is certainly going to be money when it comes to this effort. We're only going to bond if it's affordable. Again, I can't tell you what the future holds when it comes to interest rates, but I think they're going to be lower than what they are today. How much lower? It's tough to tell. But say in the instance that they do increase for some reason or reasons, we would have to rethink what that payment is and if it's affordable to us. And coordinating fundraising is going to be a lot of time and energy on everyone's part, and mostly the Zoological Society, but that's a very key component of our financing plan. And we're thinking about introducing a preview phase option where the portion of the zoo could be open to the public for their viewing before we get further into it. So a lot of risks, but we think we've thought a lot of those through, and we're certainly going to be agile and nimble as we continue forward to address any changes that come our way.
Great, thanks, Matt. A couple last pieces that we wanted to highlight in the presentation tonight. First off is the operating pro forma or business plan for the zoo itself. This was, again, an obligation that the city asked the society to put together as we were looking at embarking on this process about 2 years ago. And so the plans, the documentation we put up on the website does include the proposed business plan for phase 1A, 1B. Some of the highlights of that plan that I'll note tonight, first off, in terms of the attendance numbers, they're projecting a baseline attendance of about 850,000, which is an increase of about 63% from what they're doing at Land Park today, which is about 500,000 or so annually. There are some constraints with them being able to serve a larger number at Land Park in terms of there's no dedicated parking, and the overall size of the facility and the nature of the habitats that are there. And so there's an opportunity to see an increase happen as a result of the new facility. In the peak opening year case, they're projecting at about 935,000, and then that would decrease and settle out at the baseline of about 850 over a couple of years. Parking is included in the price of the admission. There's no parking surcharge that's priced into the pricing structure. And the pro forma does not include an annual operating subsidy from the city in order to operate the facility. This would be the responsibility of the society going forward. The pro forma also includes payment towards the bond debt service that Matt described a moment ago as prescribed in that financing plan. So that's then called out there, as well as ongoing maintenance of the campus. Lastly, we did prepare an updated economic impact analysis, or had one prepared for the project. There was one prepared in 2022. We've updated it based upon the phase 1A, 1B proposal that we have at this point. Some of the highlights from that plan: over 5 years, we're expecting or could anticipate about $4 million in city sales tax and transient lodging taxes, or TOT revenue, to occur. About $9.4 million in county and state sales taxes, although some of that would actually be replacement because of the relocation from the Land Park site. There are one-time construction impacts. While the total cost for construction of the project is about $302 million, there's some recirculating of some of those labor income dollars that happens through the economy. And so the analysis identifies about $425 million in construction impact dollars as those monies circulate through the economy, about 2,400 jobs in total that could be developed over the construction life of the project, with about $171 million in labor income to be expected. Indirect or induced benefits or impacts from the economic impacts from the project, about 176 indirect and induced jobs. These are from employees or visitors from the zoo going and utilizing other businesses and services in the city. And so we would see increases in jobs and businesses as a result of that, about 176 jobs. And that then equates to about 7.9 million in labor income each year at those other businesses. Lastly, in terms of next steps and where we are in this process, so we are scheduling the City Council public hearing for May 8th. That's what we're targeting right now for the project. That would be the City Council's opportunity to review all the materials about the project, the design in detail, the financing, the economic impact analysis, the environmental impact report, and all the other materials that we've prepared at this point. And the council could then choose to move the project forward or not. If they desired to move the project forward, a number of things would begin to happen, and we would see happen over the coming weeks and months thereafter. First would be contracts with the design teams for the next phase of the design work. We're only contracted through the design work that we've accomplished at this point, although the society is doing some additional design work at their cost right now in the event the project does move forward. And some of that's recognized in the financing plan. We are seeking state legislation for this construction manager at-risk process that Matt talked about earlier that allows us to bring that construction manager and construction firm on to the project sooner, utilize their expertise, and look at ways to streamline the delivery of the project and realize some potential management of those costs, or hopefully even some cost savings along the way. Lastly would be an operating agreement between the city and the society for the operations and maintenance of the facility long term. That would be separate from a financing agreement for the financing for phase 1A, 1B that would be included in the May 8th packet. And so I believe I hand it back over to you, Jason Lindgren.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. And so what our objective with this webinar format is to share information. And as it's being recorded, there's an opportunity to go back for folks that if you miss a question, or for any folks that you want to share this information with, this provides a resource for our residents in order to go back and find out the information about the financing plan and the steps ahead for the zoo. You can use the question and answer button that is at the bottom of the screen. And what's going on is, from the staff side, what we're doing is kind of gathering together questions. And what we'll be doing is looking over to our panel in order to answer these questions that are going forward. I will do my best in order to give our panel a little bit of a break. So if we have questions from kind of different areas, whether it's from finance, questions to the Zoological Society itself, or questions about kind of the planning process, hopefully I'll be able to cycle through and we can triage through some of these items. So, and then as we get where we're at in the evening, we're at about 6:38 in the evening currently, and we are scheduled to have our open forum, have this forum going until we're about 8 o'clock. Of course, we'll have some closing comments before we get there, but we'll see if we can get to some of these questions. And so what I'm going to be doing is calling out to some of our panelists just to see if there can be some assists on some of our questions. But I think one of the first ones, and probably just for clarification, I'm going to send this one over to City Manager Jason Behrmann. It's a question that came up early in the process: is Elk Grove the new location of the new zoo or not? And I think that's why we're all here, is to see these next steps.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, that's the current proposal, is to look at whether locating the Sacramento Zoo to the city of Elk Grove is feasible. Obviously requires a vote by our city council. So we're going through a lot of process over the last 2 years to get community engagement, have these types of community meetings as well as others, and then ultimately go to the city council for that final vote. But right now the proposal is to relocate the zoo to the city of Elk Grove.
And as a main segment of tonight's information was about the financing plan, we are getting a lot of finance questions, and I'd like to direct this one over to our finance director. And what this regards is about interest rates. And the future is uncertain. And so is there any kind of thresholds that the city will see if interest rates change dramatically, a few percentage points, 4.5%, say to 6.5%? Are there some kind of stop gaps or anything that the city will take as a threshold or a spot in which it would take a pause in the process? Would that make a large effect on the future? Mr. Paulin.
So great question. If interest rates substantially increased, I mean, that would have a negative impact on the project, right? It would increase the amount of the payment. So the question is, could that be sustained and afforded by the city? Since the Zoological Society's contribution is $2.5 million a year. So that's a really good question. It's tough to answer. But if interest rates were a couple of points higher than they are today, I would imagine that would have a couple of $1 million increase with the annual payment, and I don't think that would be affordable for the city in the long run. Conversely, if interest rates decrease, which is probably more likely, again, that would be a lower debt service payment for the city going forward, which would make the project more affordable.
Thank you, sir. And just to provide a little variety and back and forth, I'm going to go back to our city manager, Jason Behrmann. And this is a question that focuses around whether the voters should decide on a process, and what that would entail is whether a measure would go forward regarding this matter, or if a measure has been contemplated. Would this go before the voters?
Thanks, Jason. It's a great question. I think the basic answer is, the mayor and the city council, they're elected by members of the community, make decisions that have potential to have significant impacts on the future of our community. And in making those decisions, they rely on feedback from a lot of sources. One is feedback from staff, right? Recommendations from the professionals that have been hired to review and analyze the information. Also receive a lot of feedback from the community through a variety of things: emails, personal meetings, contacts, all kinds of ways that the community can relay their either concerns, support, frustration, whatever it might be related to the project, to members of the city council. And I know personally that they consider all of those comments, right? They take those comments seriously. They also take what the city staff is advising as part of their deliberative process in considering any item. Certainly the zoo is just magnified, right? Over the last 2 years, the city has spent considerable time and effort conducting that outreach, getting that feedback. Residents are certainly encouraged to voice their support or opposition to the city council in advance of any vote that may be taken on the project. So certainly encourage everybody on this meeting to let your voice be heard and express that to the city council and mayor. Now, what I also say is if the council feels that they don't have enough feedback from their constituents through normal city processes and engagement that we have, they could ask to conduct some type of statistically valid survey or polling of Elk Grove residents to see or gauge the level of support for the project in the community. We don't necessarily think that's needed or required for this. Again, it just depends on whether the council feels like they've had sufficient feedback from members of the community through the regular channels. Again, if it's their decision on whether they feel comfortable making that decision based on that information that they've received. If not, there are lots of ways of furthering that effort.
And thank you for that. We are getting some questions are starting to trickle in regarding the project itself. But before we go too far on that, back to the financing plan and back to our finance director. And what this question focuses on is that there is an element in which the financing plan does rely on community partnerships, not only for that close to $80 million at the front end, but the concept of the ongoing bond payments on the bond financing. And so the question boils down to what happens if at certain points, if we don't see these partnerships manifest? What if the $80 million doesn't happen at the front end of the financing plan? And to the extent of that, what are those what happens if the debt payments start disappearing from the contributions of our community partners?
Really good question. Thanks, Jason. So all these pieces fit together. If one of these pieces falls apart, the project isn't going to be financially sustainable. We are working, I think we mentioned in one of our slides, there's an operating agreement that we're currently working through with the Zoological Society that will have milestones as far as those fundraising commitments, that it won't just be the whole $50 million for the Zoological Society all at once. There'll be various, again, milestones where we'll continually progress. Once we see a certain level of commitment from the zoo, the city will continue to do more work, and so on and so forth. Again, all these pieces of the financing plan fit together, and $80 million is a really substantial number. And so if any one of those pieces or parts falls apart, that's going to put a real crimp into the financing plan.
And thank you for that, sir. We have a question that's come up on regarding the economic evaluation impact analysis, and I think they were the last few slides of in the presentation of the financial plan presentation. But will those be presented out to council as far as the economic evaluation impact analysis of the project?
Yeah, I can take this one, Jason. And so, yes, the report that it's up on the website that we presented the summary out of tonight was prepared by a group called Applied Economics out of Phoenix. They prepared the report that was done back in 2022, so they were familiar with it, and we had them take a look at this particular phasing plan. And yes, this will be part of the presentation to the city council in the future.
So I'd like to invite Mr. Jason Jacobs, if you're able to field this question, which is that we fielded from the Q&A that the city of Sacramento is currently providing and subsidizing the zoo on an annual basis. And is this intended to, how would that move forward? And can you comment to that as far as the financial plan from the operations standpoint of the zoo project going forward?
The only subsidized fuel, I'm sorry. The city of Sacramento provides funding for 2 employees that are were with the zoo before the zoo became a private nonprofit in 1997. So, and that is from a labor agreement, and some might view that as a subsidy, but we have since that time, as employees retire or leave the zoo that are with the city, we absorb all those costs. So unlike most zoos within the United States, we do not receive any significant subsidy. We have a lot of experience operating a zoo with a budget surplus that we invest right back into our mission.
And I think, Mr. Jacobs, while we have you online, one of the kind of elements that also came about for the move of the zoo initially, why does the zoo need to move? And then what are we fulfilling here in order to move forward with this project?
The zoo is operating on a 97-year-old campus. The campus is only 14.5 acres. It is undersized for this size market, and it is certainly undersized for the animals. In the last 20 years, the zoo has sent out or lost its bears, hippos. In my tenure here, we've had to send away our tigers, our chimpanzees. We simply do not have the space to care for large animals in perpetuity at the site. And every animal has a story. We specialize in several small species like the thick-billed parrot and the western pond turtles. But we need those umbrella species like the giraffe, the lions, and the rhinoceros to get those animals here. That's number one for the animals. Number two is the zoo is not designed to meet the needs of a population, a growing population of a metro area of over 2.5 million people a year. We get 500,000 visitors a year, where we know we could easily accommodate 1 million visitors if we had parking and a suitable size zoo. We look at similar size metro populations that are slightly smaller than us, like Kansas City, Cincinnati, and San Antonio. All of those zoos host over 1 million visitors a year. It's not just for the animals, but it's for the region and to give this community and the region the zoo it deserves.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jacobs. We'll probably come right back around to you, but we wanted to give you a break and an opportunity. And to our finance director, part of the question was, in the financing plan, how was it that the city came to the determination that no annual operating subsidy or cost would be incurred by the city going forward with the project? I think part of that's being explained, but I think it'd be a good kind of a tail these together between the city financial perspective and then the operations. Mr. Jacobs, we might follow up just a little bit with you about the ongoing operation of the new zoo facility.
Right. So again, the financing plan doesn't assume any annual operating subsidy that's going to be required from the city as part of the ongoing operations of the zoo. And maybe Mr. Jacobs can further elaborate on why that is.
Yeah, we worked on a very strenuous, very detailed pro forma on the operation of the new zoo. And we did that using conservative numbers. We know we can reach 1 million visitors, but for the safety of our operation long term, we based it on like 850,000 visitors, which is not a stretch by any means of the imagination for a facility that is being proposed to have as visitors, right? And so we looked at the numbers of the staff, the operations, we compared them with similar size zoos. We adjusted the pricing of those operations, those budgets, to look at what it would cost to operate here in Sacramento, in this greater region. And we are confident we can operate it and make those payments based on the pro forma that we have proposed.
Thank you, sir, for that. To shift gears a little bit, I think this is going to head over in your direction, Mr. Jordan, but it is a question that's based on the environmental impact report. Overall, I know it's a lot of information that's in there and it is available for folks to go online, but what are some of the expected impacts on the nearby communities for the new zoo project? And in particular, those impacts, traffic, and plans for mitigation. I know there was a little bit in the presentation about kind of the overview of the parking and how to get that circulation element going. But just to field, I know fielding an environmental question and impacts in just a few moments is not an easy thing to compact down.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. So yeah, in terms of the adjoining neighborhood, there are a number of potential impacts. We've identified a range of mitigation measures for those that can be accomplished within the construction and operation of the facility. Some of those we think about can be as sort of immediate as, say, dust that comes up from construction activity. So there's mitigation measures that deal with how the dust is managed, that there's certain watering activities that have to happen in order to control for that. We also look at the emissions from construction equipment. So there's mitigation measures on using the most advanced construction equipment that's out there. It's called Tier 4 requirements. Those are some of the latest with the least amount of emissions related to the particulate matter that comes out of them. That's available on the market to be able to manage for that. And certainly the construction opportunity on this site would occur whether it was the zoo or some other sort of project. So by looking at it here and thinking about those measures, we can apply those. There are project-specific measure or impacts that could occur. These are things like, say, noise from certainly the animals and the people and events that may occur at the facility, in addition to smells that may occur. Certainly, some animals are smellier than others. So the EIR looks at all of those potential impact areas and identifies the ways we can do mitigation or activities, change the programming of the facility in order to address some of those. So on, say, the noise basis, there's requirements to limit amplified sound after 10 o'clock and before, I believe it's 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning. Unless there's, of course, there's an emergency circumstance, then utilizing the PA system is going to be important. There are other things about light intrusion or light trespass from the property, restrictions on that, and being able to manage for those instances about how we shield the lighting. We've also looked in terms of the site plan itself and locating those areas where people would be gathering for events and otherwise, and moving them or identifying them as far on the west side of the site as we can, as far away from, say, the Sterling Meadows neighborhood or the Sioux City area neighborhood as possible in order to. So you'll see that with the events pavilion over at the Giraffe Lodge is a good example of that. And then we have smaller sort of gathering areas that are more centrally located as opposed to on the eastern property line. So those are a couple of things we look at there. Traffic. CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, requires us to look at traffic on what we call vehicle miles traveled basis. There are significant impacts that occur with that, essentially around the transition from the existing site and land park to Elk Grove. Regionally, people would be driving longer distances in order to visit the zoo. And so there is a significant unavoidable impact with that. And by corollary, impacts on greenhouse gases would also be significant and unavoidable. Other traffic impacts that we think about are what folks normally think about as traffic impacts. This would be congestion, the need for additional lane width on a roadway. Those are outside the scope of CEQA, but they are something that we've looked at. And so we think about how we've designed Camera Road, the roundabouts, classical Lots Parkway to be able to provide for that efficient movement and move people through. We've done a lot of modeling to understand those interactions and how people move efficiently, and really making it the most attractive for folks to utilize that camera to lots to classical movement for that area there, as opposed to cutting through, say, on Bilby or Kyler over from Promenade, or coming down directly on Lots Parkway for the majority of the regional sort of oriented traffic. Certainly folks that are in the immediate neighborhood are going to take other routes, say the Road B coming out of Sioux City or Lots Parkway from the north, and certainly the roads are anticipating all of that like they normally would for any sort of development. So I think that covers most of those sort of topics, Jason, that I think was asked in the question.
And up to and including that an environmental impact report is available online and has extensive materials and and it'll be coming forward for approvals and all the steps that are involved. So that Sac Zoo site. And again, just want to reiterate, our use of the webinar environment. This is for us to share information. And again, that website's going to be a driver. The recording of this webinar itself will be posted up on that website. So it gives an opportunity for folks to get the information about what the nature of the project and the numbers involved. Sometimes it's really helpful to have those numbers, visit the website, and get a few items on there. I did want to shift back, as we were talking a lot about the finance plan, back to our finance director. A little bit of a double-barreled question, because one of them might require a specific number. So I wanted to give you a little bit of time in order to chew that one and come back with the answer on that. And so I'll start with the tougher one. That's the specific number, which talks about the rainy day fund. It would be the reference to the reserve that the city maintains for the general fund, and that there is a use of the reserve for in the financing plan. So what effect would that have on the city's reserve for this financing plan for the zoo? That's going to be the first barrel of this question. And the second barrel of this question is a general concern that's raised by folks as to whether their property taxes will go up in order to pay for this project, for the new zoo project. So I'll let you take your choice as to which barrel you'd like to face first.
Thanks, Jason. I'll take the second one first. No property tax increases are going to be needed to finance the project. And we're not going to touch the rainy day reserve. So it's a little nuanced, but our general fund reserve has a few different components. One is our pure rainy day reserve for economic uncertainties that we are proposing to use as part of the financing plan. Every year, the city plans to fully fund that reserve. And if we have funds left over after that, we put additional reserve funds into either the capital reserve and or our economic development reserve and or our opportunity reserve. And that's what we've been able to do through solid financial management throughout the city's history. And so again, the city's rainy day reserve for economic uncertainties is not proposed to be used as part of the financing plan. It's other components of the reserve that we would need to use towards the project.
I appreciate you fielding both facets of the question. I'd like to return to Mr. Jacobs for a bit about the operations of the zoo. And in particular, this might be about other operations that might occur around the zoo. It's a question about whether there's been consideration about security at the zoo, including whether it's a 24-hour basis operation for providing security, which I figure there's got to be a plan out there. But will that have an effect on the Elk Grove Police Department? Is there any additional costs that are contemplated in the security and safekeeping of our residents that are going to be at the new zoo facility?
Well, this time we provide our own in-house security team. Of course, we keep our local law officials informed of events going on at the zoo, but we employ our own security force 24 hours a day. So, and that's how it's done at most major zoos. And we would continue to look at that model in the future.
And to go back to Mr. Paulin and a finance question, and I think we asked the question and prior, there's kind of a nuance to the question. Is the prior question asked was about what will the city's reaction be if we look at rates changing significantly? And I think as you kind of put it, the forecast out there, there's a optimism in terms of the rates that are out there. But is there any kind of a alternative game plan if the rates do start going up? And it's an interesting conjecture, but whether or not there's been any consideration of entering into other types of options or going into working with other organizations, perhaps for the bonds.
So I think great question again. Lots of good questions. And all of the pieces of the financing plan work together. I mean, I think it's something for us definitely to be thinking about if interest rates do get to the point where that annual debt service payment is not sustainable and affordable, right? There's a lot of different components to the plan. We not sure. We're cautiously optimistic, right? Where we have this legislation pending in Sacramento to get the construction manager at risk on board to hopefully manage the project in a way that get them on early and control costs, and hopefully even Christopher said maybe even reduce costs. So there's just a lot of moving pieces, but it's really about the long-term sustainability and affordability of that payment. If and when it got to the point where it wasn't, we would have to have some serious conversations about the ability for the project to move forward if it wasn't sustainable for the city moving forward.
We had some questions crop up about the sizing of the facility, and one of the first ones, and I think Mr. Jordan, this would be right up your alley in terms of responding, but maybe some to go back. And I know early in the presentation there was the example of what the current Sacramento Zoo site is, but how many acres is the first phase? So that's that phase 1A, 1B. How does it compare to the existing? And maybe just even a scope of what is the overall vision of the full phases, I think, would probably give some sense of the scope and size for folks that are
Yeah, sure. So again, by comparison, the existing zoo is about 14.7 acres. So fairly small, pretty easy to walk around given its size. The phase 1A, 1B component is measuring at about 28 acres right now, so nearly double of what the existing campus looks like. Build out of the entire, all four phases of the proposed project are about 63 acres inside the fence line. And all those numbers exclude parking, roads, other utilities. It does include some back of house operations and drive aisles and support facilities to make all that work. But really the sort of proper campus you're going to be experiencing in phase 1A, 1B is about 28 acres and then about 63 at build out condition. So again, by comparison, about 14.7 out there today.
Thank you, sir. For going back to our friends over at the Zoological Society, Mr. Jacobs, how will the zoo and the city, what are the efforts that are being done to prioritize environmental sustainability and operations and conservation efforts at the facility?
Well, I could take about an hour to answer that question. We have several environmental experts that are helping us with the design of the zoo, to use best practices in landscape, in irrigation, in energy efficiencies. But really, the core mission of the zoo is conservation. And we house the largest flock of thick-bill parrots in human care anywhere in the world. Each one of those parrots is a precious animal. If I didn't care about conservation as a zoo director, I would just fill that aviary with lovebirds. But these parrots are very important. They're the only native species of parrot native to the United States. That's conservation. The fact that we manage the okapi population within the United States, it's the closest living relative of the giraffe. 87 animals in the United States. They're only found in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a very tumultuous region of Africa. We send considerable resources to the DRC as well as staff time to take care of this species. That's conservation. And never underestimate the conservation value of having an incredible zoo when you are able to educate and inspire thousands of children and people of all ages about the needs of animals and inspire them to make a difference and learn. So it's a very holistic question for me, but we're going to look, as I sum it up, the best use of environmental efficiencies in construction and design. And it is our mission. And we combine that mission with fun and learning at the same time. So thank you.
I think looking to the future, conservation efforts, protecting our planet, I think you've brought out some of the optimists in our crowd. And we have a question that's going to come back to our finance director, which is that if it is not required that we need contingency funds or escalation monies, how does that get credited back to the different funding sources? So, or if more is needed, where would those come? Where would funds come from? But I
I
think
thought, I thought this was an optimistic question.
that's
It's a mixed bag.
it flipped right at the end.
Thanks, Jason. We haven't thought through kind of how that would work. I imagine proportionality or something along those lines would, how we would credit funds back if in the event. I like the optimistic side of things. If we ended up spending less than what we anticipate, that we would credit funds back. Part of that depends on some of those funds have to be used towards certain things. So there was a really small component, say for the tree planting, right? So if there was, funds that were saved, we didn't have to plant as many trees, or they cost less than we anticipated, that would have to go back to the tree mitigation fee fund and not to the general fund. So part of it depends on kind of what we're talking about. But yeah, hopefully that comes to bear. So love the optimism. And again, going back to the second part of the question, though, the pessimistic part of it about I think we're getting some questions too about just kind of the overall costs and whatnot, how we would manage those. And I thought we had a really important slide on the managing risk. It's kind of an iterative process, right? There's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to managing a project of this size and complexity. And this is a really big, I'm not gonna dance around things. It's a really big financial commitment for the city. I talked about those general fund reserves, and those are the figures at the end of the last fiscal year, and that's all in. That's the total amount of the city's discretionary reserves at that point. So that's a really big commitment for us. Those are big commitments for the Zoological Society and then the regional partners as well. So all those components of the financing plan fit together. And if one of those really kind of falls apart, that's going to put a real damper on the plan and the project overall. It just really doesn't work. The city doesn't have the financial capability to substantially go beyond those numbers that we've talked about this evening. It's just not sustainable for us.
I appreciate that, as it puts markers out there, right, of what I would call thresholds of confidence, right? As the project moves forward, there are going to be these check-in points as things move forward that provide a way to do those evaluations. And I think we have some questions that are coming along a similar line. And Mr. Jordan, I think this is about future phasing, future planning, as far as what does happen as a project of this scope, which is planned to be phased. Do you have I think there's kind of two parts to this one, which is there a sense between the timelines between future phases? And if there are kind of these, if there is a kind of contemplated time frame between phases, is there any contemplation of the use of the spaces when they are not under development? So it's kind of where there are those vacant spots. Are there plans for what would be the interim uses for those spots?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the time frame between the different phases, going from say phase 1A, 1B, we sort of see that as a totality. We're trying to get the financing plan set up to try to deliver that as a first delivery of the project. To get to phase 1C, the finance plan doesn't contemplate that. It doesn't look at that. So we would really be looking to the society and regional partnerships to help deliver those future phases. So it's really about what that timeline is for those additional dollars post phase 1A, 1B to come in. Same with phases 2, phase 3, phase 4. It's really what is the ability of sort of the region to help finance those things. Now, again, we've not laid out a financing plan for those yet. Those would occur later, sort of once we get through that first phase 1A, 1B. So a lot of details still need to be figured out. If there is regional interest, then those phases could move quickly. If there's not, then they're probably going to take a little bit longer. In terms of what would happen with the site, if as we're waiting for those future phases, I look at this sort of two ways. One, inside the fence line. What we do in the first phase in 1A, 1B is we establish that outer marker of the 63 acres. We establish all of the parking lot. That outer marker for the 63 acres is important because that key fence line sets the outer perimeter, and it's actually a requirement to have that to a certain design standard for the federal permitting that a facility like this has to have. Mr. Jacobs can talk about more of the details of this with what the U.S. Department of Agriculture requires, but essentially there's certain fencing standards and security standards that the facility has to have. We would establish that at its ultimate boundary on day one. And so those areas that are inside the phase 1C, 2, 3, 4 areas would go for some sort of interim activity. This could be a stockpile of additional soil that we may need for a future phase. This could be maybe a materials yard area, extra materials that could be outside of an enclosed facility. They would all be screened from public view. There's fencing and walls that are designed into the plan along Lots Parkway and B and Classical, fencing along the Shed Sea Channel that's on the north side of the boundary. So you'd see it complete essentially with that outer wall in the first phase delivery, but then there'd be opportunities for sort of some staging and stuff, but no habitat areas. From a visitor experience, we still need to work out a lot of details, but there would be a combination of fencing and landscaping to help sort of draw your eye away from those areas that are really unfinished. But as you look at the phase 1A, 1B plan, it really is going to feel like a complete zoo. That 28 acres is going to feel natural and complete. There's going to be a lot of stuff to see. We've tried to create a lot of interesting opportunities and view sheds into different areas along the way. The parking lot side, though, to focus on that piece for a minute, again, at build out, we think 1,600 parking stalls are going to be needed, and that's going to take place over those two parking lots, the north lot and the south lot. But if we go back and think about the entire or the operational characteristics for what the society's identified for what they think phase 1A, 1B is going to operate at, about that 850,000 person, that 825 or so stabilized number of attendants. If we equate that over in the same formulas that we're using, we'd need about 850 parking stalls, 825 parking stalls. So it's more than what the north lot is. That's only about 530. So we're going to need the south lot. And so I think the way we've structured everything from the design is that south lot would also be constructed. From a cost perspective, we are thinking and we're programming for that to be a gravel lot, to be landscaping around the outside. It's only needed for about 25% of the calendar days a year that the zoo's open. So these are going to be spring nights, sort of like tonight's, or spring days like today, summer, early fall, the sun's out. So we don't really need to have a lot of infrastructure in terms of parking lot lighting and other sort of things out there. And so with a higher albedo level, to be more reflectability of the sun. So really we don't want to put a ton of investment into that. We want to see how folks utilize the site. So that's the way we think about sort of the phasing and the delivery and what would happen on an interim basis for a lot of those areas. Jason?
I think I'm going to go from this Jason to Jason Jacobs. And I think as our finance director pointed out, the endeavor, the scope of the project is sizable. And Mr. Jacobs, if you could provide our listeners kind of a perspective of when the last time a zoo project, whether it's new or relocation of this scale, has been undertaken in the United States. Maybe even internationally. You might have some numbers too. So.
Internationally, there's been several zoos opened or relocated in the last decade. Within the United States, zoos that have relocated within the past 40 years have been Miami, Indianapolis, Waco, Texas, and new zoos, certainly zoological facilities like Disney's Animal Kingdom have opened. There's been major zoological facilities that have opened, such as aquariums also, like the Georgia World Aquarium. And while moving a zoo is not common, investment in zoos is very common. Within our own state, both the Los Angeles and Fresno zoos have received tremendous investments to reimagine and transform their zoo, which were, aged facilities also. So there's many ways to look at it, but we look at the numbers and we look at the fact that we are only serving a fraction of the community that we can serve, and that people are very excited about this.
Thank you for that. And I think in a similar vein, back to our finance director, as the city was looking and working with the Zoological Society on the finance plan, were there any sources that we went to in order to draw upon? Was there any financial plans modeled after from any of these kind of moves as a framework for the city and the Zoological Society to move forward with?
Great question. No, this is an original. And I think, any entity, right? I think these projects are pretty unique, as Jason was just saying. It's fairly infrequent that a zoo moves and or is built from the ground up. So I think all of them are unique. The entities that are involved in the construction and or movement of those projects are also unique in how they're funded. And so taking all those things into account, even if we may have looked at other entities and how they funded their zoo, it may not have been applicable to us. So again, it was kind of more of an inward looking endeavor for both us and the Zoological Society to see how we could cover that cost.
Thanks for everyone's patience. My mouse decided to go on vacation for a little bit. But again, here we are in our webinar environment. We're at about the hour of 7:18. And just so folks know, this is being recorded. We will be posting this up on our city website. As well, the materials will be posted up, and that'll be the continuing process and resource to go to for news and updates on the new zoo project. And part of it is this webinar is intended to help share information. And I think one of the questions came up is, why was it selected to do this format of a webinar in a Zoom environment? And Mr. Jordan, I think I'm going to reach over your way just for you to be able to provide some input as well, but just another item in our toolbox in order to conduct outreach. But I'll hand it over to you for some insights as to this environment for presenting information.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think there's a couple of reasons why looking at doing this like we've done tonight with the Zoom platform. Certainly what we've found, there's a lot of interest in the project. And so having the ability for a lot of people to choose to tune in and join the conversation, be able to have their questions answered. Zoom gives us actually quite a bit of flexibility as opposed to an in-person meeting where we'd be limited by how big the room is. Folks can be at home while they're listening in, asking their questions while they're making dinner for their family or trying to get the kids to bed or whatever else life may have going on. Maybe somebody's at a baseball practice or a baseball game or a softball practice tonight, and it's easy to be able to listen in, but you've got your kids there and being able to manage all that. So certainly there's some flexibility for our residents and other interested parties that you can join in remotely and sort of be able to manage those two things to be able to get your questions answered. I will say, I think we had, over 230 people register for the event tonight. We've seen attendance sort of ebb and flow throughout the night of between about 40 and 60 people, folks coming and going as they have time and are available. And certainly the recording is the other aspect. The Zoom platform gives us the ability to do this recording and be able to post it later and have that sort of flexibility for folks to be able to go back easily and see it again later and not sort of work within the confines of, say, our council chambers or trying to bootstrap together another facility. So those are some of the reasons that we see this as an ideal opportunity.
Thank you, sir. I do have a question that came in, and I think we're going to be directing this over to our city manager, Jason Behrmann. And what it is I always appreciate the scrutiny and attentiveness of our residents as they look at the presentation materials. And one question came up about the financing plan, and it goes into a level of specificity about the use of Measure A funds. And so the question, I think, stems from that the financing plan is designed that it has no effect on current services. But a concern was raised that if Measure A funds are being used, wouldn't that be taking them away from other opportunities or uses in order? And Measure A for folks, it's funding that can be used for repairs of streets and maintenance and putting in street infrastructure, the infrastructure needs throughout the city. So there's a concern, would this be diverting funds from city services from the Measure A funds contemplated in the finance plan? Mr. Behrmann.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, so I think it's important as we talked about the financing plan to recognize there's kind of two major components, right? There's the zoo itself, and then there's some of the infrastructure necessary to support that, including water and sewer and drainage and roadways. And a lot of that work, the infrastructure piece of it, the offsite stuff, is going to be necessary anyways, with or without the zoo, those facilities need to get put in there in order to facilitate any type of future development in that area, whether it's homes, businesses, or a zoo. So a lot of it, including Measure A, CFDs, roadway funds, all the things that went into the offsite infrastructure are monies that would be spent on that infrastructure at some point. We're just kind of pulling that money forward. So it's really not taking money away from any other services. It's really just directing that now at this time to help support the infrastructure associated with the zoo project.
Thank you for that, sir. I think going back to Mr. Jacobs, we have another question that is inquiring about the impacts of the partnership of the new zoo, what it will have on the University of California Veterinary School, and are there funding opportunities that are available at the state or federal level? So I think it's what partnerships are you contemplating seeing that could be possible with such a new facility?
Well, the Sacramento Zoological Society has partnered with the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine for over 50 years. In fact, zoological medicine was pioneered at this zoo in the 1950s, early 1960s by the late Dr. Murray Fowler. We have trained more zoo and wildlife veterinarians at this facility than any other zoo in the nation by far. Every UC Davis vet student goes through a rotation here, and we have a full-time resident here from UC Davis. It creates an incredible animal health program. We only see that program expanding with the new zoo. We have had verbal commitments that the university is very excited about the new zoo. And keep in mind, we're excited about this, but this project hasn't been approved yet. So we look forward to increasing our partnership with the university. As far as state funding goes, we're not sure of that yet, right? That would have to be something that we would work with the city of Elk Grove to pursue that, I assume. But hopefully those opportunities are there in the future.
And the next question that we have is directed back at the financing plan itself and back to our finance director. And what the question I think focuses in on is about when you are looking at a finance plan and looking at the scope and time of interest that's paid, how are interest costs reflected in the finance plan?
Great question. So that debt service payment that I had a slide on, that about $7.8 million figure, that incorporates both principal and interest to finance, again, that $114.5 million at current tax exempt rates, which are about 4.25% for a governmental entity like us with a AA credit rating. So that's where those interest costs are captured, are in that debt service payment that we worked with a third-party consultant that helps us model debt service. So great question.
Our next questions, I think, head over into your camp, Mr. Jordan. And the first one is about how public transit is contemplated to service the site, how that would be kind of envisioned for the future. And then I'll save the other question for after that, because I think it's someone looking into the details of some of the end of the presentation. But we'll start with public transit.
Sure. So, right now, transit services in Elk Grove are actually operated by Sacramento Regional Transit. We transitioned the E-Trans service over to them a couple of years ago. And so they've taken over the operations of that. So a little bit different arrangement that we've had over the last 15 years or so. We've had some initial conversations with them, and certainly there are some bus lines in the immediate area. Right now, they come down Promenade Parkway and serve sort of the Kaiser Building and a little bit of the Sky River Casino. And so we want to have conversations with them about the extension of those services or maybe other bus lines over to the site, be able to serve it on opening day and beyond. We don't have details worked out on that. Actually, I'll say the RT even reached out as recently as this week to sort of say, hey, make sure if the council is going to approve this, we need to get together very soon and start working out some of the details of that. Some of those details are not just what routes will serve and what's the frequency, but also where those stops are going to be. How proximate are they going to be to the entrance? And so we've got some details to work out regarding that. But absolutely, we really want to have some good transit services to support this and be able to bring folks to the site and be able to enjoy it and get you home safely at the end of your visit. Long term, the city does desire for the extension of light rail into the city or potentially bus rapid transit along a similar corridor. This would come down Bruceville to Bighorn and then down Bighorn corridor. And essentially, what would be the south parking lot could serve as the terminus of that line, if not next to the last station. We've updated some of our land plans recently in the immediate area and some of our transit plans or transportation plans in the immediate area and show the revised line on those plans as recent as last year. We're actually in the process of starting an update to our light rail plan itself and creating a good financing plan, development plan for that. We were awarded a Caltrans grant late last year and have partnered with RT on that plan. We're actually soliciting proposals right now. Actually, the proposal period closed. We're getting ready to select a consultant to help us with that and expect that work to start over the summer. And so that'll feed in as well. And so long term, as those services are hopefully extended to the city, there'd be additional transit opportunities beyond just bus, but more high frequency, high capacity transit service to this area, to this location, and serving essentially right at the front door of the zoo. So Jason, what was the second question you had?
Well, it's going to be a little bit nearer term because it is interesting, right? That some of the events of our long-term planning poised the opportunity to even consider a project of this scope. But we've got some folks that are chomping at the bit, and there is, hold on, the preview zone has been mentioned. What is the plan for the preview zone? And that would be a little bit more of a near term. And when would that open, or when would that be contemplated on the timeline?
Yeah. So the preview zone is a concept that we're investigating. We haven't made any decisions on it completely, but we are looking at it as an opportunity. Essentially, this would be the Giraffe Lodge or the main restaurant that's out along the perimeter at the south west corner of the campus site of the 63 acres, so furthest away from say the Sterling Meadows neighborhood, all the existing residences that are going in. So it would be that building, the restaurant operation, the events pavilion or events area that goes adjacent to that, along with the adjoining Savannah area. So they give you an opportunity for a giraffe and some hoof stock, and then the care quarters that are behind that for the giraffe barn and the hoof stock barn that goes with it. And that would give the opportunity as sort of an early opening for the campus for folks to be able to come out and see some initial phase of the project, be able to have a dining experience. It allows for some level of revenue. Jason Jacobs can explain more about in terms of the operations plan, but these are species that you would normally take or have the ability to take to an animal care facility like a vet hospital. You know, you wouldn't run them into a full x-ray machine. You'd be using portable equipment over at the care quarters or at the barn space for them. So we don't need the animal hospital, the veterinary care building that would go along with the full build out because you'd use those more for smaller animals. And so we think there's an opportunity to look at that. We're studying it to figure out, okay, what does that exactly look like? What would be the utility package that go with it? What amount of the ring road, the utility service area, the back of house operations would need to be there? There's what we call life support systems that take care of sort of the water circulation and about sustainability earlier tonight. There's, the campus is planned to be an all-electric facility. There's some water elements for some of the habitats, and there's recycling of the water, purification of the water for some sustainability aspects there that need to get programmed in. So we're looking at those as a way to deliver something sooner, sooner sort of being a relative term. And then being able to, folks can come and visit it and see what the progress is being made. You could still even then see some of the construction that's happening beyond that initial phase. Again, it's something we're exploring. There's a lot of pluses and minuses to it. Pluses include we're bringing some of those construction costs up earlier, so we don't have to carry as much escalation cost. It allows us to start working out some details and really get some stuff going. People can see those opportunities and be able to continue to look at additional partnerships. You can sort of showcase it. But there's challenges that come with it too. Like you start making design decisions and those can cascade through future phases that you haven't worked out all the details on. So I think we're really grateful to have a great design team that's helping us look through all of those angles and explore those options and what makes sense. Ultimately, we're going to make those decisions after we bring on the construction management firm, or ideally that would be the case. And so this legislation we talked about earlier, the construction manager at risk, having the contractor come on board early in a more of a consultation role to look at what those interactions are and what that phasing looks like and what the delivery schedule could actually be based upon their experience with projects as complex as this. Construction manager at risk models are used a lot on things like airports and port projects, because just the overall complexities of these projects, really being able to manage them in a very specific way and deal with the construction plans being available more on a rolling basis. So we're looking at all of that. So when it comes down to what is opening day, starting to set a date for those things, we can talk optimistically and really push our design teams and our construction team, hopefully ultimately to be able to do it. But really the key questions come down to those partnership dollars. Being able to get that 80 million that Matt talked about earlier, those partnership dollars completes the financing package for the project. And having those dollars available sooner allows us to really ramp up some of the construction, hopefully, and advance some things quicker where we can. And again, working with our contracting team to be able to do some of that stuff. So there are a lot of details. I don't want to get overly ahead of ourselves in terms of how that construction schedule would really pencil out. But I think, as Jason Jacobs talked about in the accreditation side and thinking about the accreditation needs, there is a sort of overall urgency to the project. A lot of folks, when they're talking about partnering with us on the project or participating in the financing, you want to be able to see those dollars being utilized and something delivered as quickly as possible. So we want to make sure we're using the dollars wisely. We're building really the best opportunity that's there. We're not shortchanging anything. We're managing those expectations, but also delivering on the promises that come with the partnerships. So a lot of work still to come, and we're really need to dive into more of those details along the way if the council wants to move the project forward.
Well, and thank you. And I think you're resonating with some of our residents just in terms of looking for assurances as this process moves forward and looking at the financing plan. We've had a few questions that come up, and I think, Mr. Jacobs, this would be right in your wheelhouse. But they are direct questions about the solvency of the Zoological Society, and whether or not I don't know if you have your liberty to be able to make any sharings tonight, because here we're really here for spreading information that we do know for certain, but whether you can just touch to the base of kind of the solvency and footing of entering into a partnership with the Zoological Society, what that means, and whether or not you can give any kind of an indication of funds raised to date to that community contribution.
Well, the Zoological Society is a very solvent organization. We are run as a model nonprofit with a board of directors that takes their volunteer role very seriously, looking at the fiduciary responsibility of the zoo while combining that with our mission, right? We're going to talk a lot more about the role we have played at the May 8th council meeting, but what I can tell you is that in the past 18 months, the zoo has raised more funds than we have ever raised as a nonprofit, because people give to a big idea. And there are angels in this community that have given to this project who believe in it. And there are other major corporations and donors waiting to see this project officially approved before they make a commitment to it. So we are very excited at the potential of this, and we are confident we can meet those goals.
Well, not only that, it's pretty exciting to have an almost near centenarian in our midst with a zoological society that's had a nice heading towards 100 years old here pretty soon. So, but along those same lines, I think about the partnership, we had a question that came up about whether there'll be a formal agreement with the Zoological Society. And I think City Manager Behrmann, this would be right up your alley. Is there a formal agreement that's planned, contemplated? Is there a schedule when that would come forward to council, and what would that kind of agreement look like?
Yes, Jason, we are working currently on drafting that plan. The intent would be to bring that back to the city council at the same time they consider other approvals associated with the zoo, and that would outline the financial obligations of the Zoological Society as well as the city of Elk Grove.
And in terms of, again, I think this is for our folks, our residents that are tuning in and listening and looking for assurances. And I think our finance director, you might have a sense of this on the timing and the sequencing of funds, but will all the funds that are needed for the entire project, all of that, that is all intended to be committed and raised prior to the first shovel of any dirt being turned?
So great question. No, we're not going to need to have $302 million all in hand by the time the project starts. There are different phases, even within the first 1A, phases 1A and 1B of the project. As I talked about before, that operating agreement that Jason Behrmann just talked about has several different milestones over a few years outlined in it. So this project is a multi-year project. And typically projects of this complexity and size, you don't need to have all of the cash on hand to start. But we'll need to make sure that we keep an eye on those timing considerations when the cash on hand is actually needed. So I don't know if others from our group want to chime in on those timing considerations as well, but we don't need all that cash on hand right up front.
I'll just chime in briefly on that. And Matt's right. We're not going to have it all up front, but we are going to have it before we award the construction contracts, because we'll need to commit that. So any bond financing that's necessary will have to go and be secured before that. So what we don't want to have happen is enter into construction contracts, start construction, and then not have all that money secured. So that would be the plan. But until we reach that point of securing those contracts, there's going to be that phase in where the funds are going to be coming in from various sources, including the Zoological Society and outside partners.
And I think the next set of questions that came in did relate about construction timelines. And Mr. Jordan, it might be beneficial for us to roll back in the presentation slides, but it's about those economic impacts. And I think the first question is really about what would be that kind of timeline and the construction timeline of when it would go out to bid and that type of impact that the construction itself would have. And then is there contemplated the economic effect of employment that stems from a project such as the new zoo project? And I think we had a few slides that covered some of those data points.
Yeah, so we do have a couple of slides, and I can roll back a little bit if it's helpful in terms of some of the economic analysis information. So in terms of the one-time construction impacts, again, we're looking at about $425 million total. Again, this becomes the recirculating of those income dollars for construction team members through the economy. It's not just the overall construction total, which is $302 million. There's some amplification of those salary dollars because folks end up spending that money within the local economy in various ways, right? The plan does outline about 2,400 total construction jobs, and about $171 million in labor income. So as we then think about that in terms of a time frame perspective, and Jason Behrmann sort of mentioned this in terms of those dollars coming in and what that sort of schedule ends up looking like a little bit. So we don't need everything, that whole $302 million fully secured today, or let's say, summer of 2024. Because there's design work that still needs to happen, and we need to get those designs to a place where you actually have a set of plans that a contractor could actually go and build. And so the plans that you see on the website are not those level of plans. They're good plans. They're good detail plans that allow us to understand the interactions between spaces and how the site and the development of it relate to the surrounding environment, like the neighborhoods to the north and to the east. The circulation aspects and all of that. But when we start getting construction documents, we want to look at, how exactly is the building built? What sort of fasteners do you use for different components? What's the detailed structural section of a roadway? How deep actually is this water line or this sewer line? A lot of details, right? And so we've got a lot of that work that we need to still put together. Details on the grading plan and landscaping and all of that. Exact counts of how many trees are we going to be buying with those tree mitigation funds, and what species are they? Are they qualifying species that the funds can be utilized for? And so a lot of that stuff is going to take time. It's going to take several months, couple of years probably, to pull all of that stuff together. And so then the CMAR process construction manager at risk can allow us to then roll those plans out into construction in a phased basis. But then it goes back to when are those dollars available and the commitment levels. And so what we articulate in the overall financing plan and what we're working through with that financing agreement are the times at which those dollars are made available in terms of the partnership money, when's those the bond money is going to need to be available and secured in order to do that. And so our objective is that when we talk about the on-site improvements, that those dollars are all secured at that point, that they're realizable, because then that allows us to actually enter into those construction contracts. When we think about the off-site infrastructure, sewer, water, roads, drainage facilities, those are things that in many respects would be utilized by whatever project would be here. So there's an opportunity that we're looking at of, well, are those things that are able to move sooner than later? How exactly would that work relative to the overall financing plan? But as Matt Paulin identified, we've got a bunch of cash that's available today to work through the design, maybe even some of those utility construction elements. And then we get into the on-site piece, and that's where then those partner dollars start to come in.
So thank you for that. I wanted to take a quick moment. We're at 7:42, and so we're getting close to the hour that we're going to be concluding. So if there are further questions from folks, please do use that Q&A section on the screen. If you feel like there is anything that you've gotten a response to, please throw those in there. And I also reach out to my fellow team of staff. Thank you so much for helping coordinate. But if there's anything that I've missed, please feel free to send it my way and we can make sure we can go there. We did have someone ask a little bit more of a question digging into the agreement with the Zoological Society and how that's contemplated in the future. And so I think I'd be returning back to City Manager Jason Behrmann. But the question starts to get into the aspects of whether the forward-going agreement with the zoo and the Zoological Society is that intended to generate revenue, to generate a profit for the city, or is there a different relationship that's contemplated as far as how the city and Zoological Society would treat the zoo facility? For instance, would Elk Grove be the landlord? And how does that partnership of the city and the Zoological Society, how is that contemplated to move forward?
As far as the partnership goes, so the city would own the land. We would be the owner of the zoo itself. The Zoological Society would be our partner. They would operate the zoo. They would run the zoo on a day-to-day basis, and we'd work together on that. The city does not envision this as a for-profit or a profit center for the city. There certainly will be some revenue generated associated with it, with sales tax and other things. We talked about the economic impacts, which are rollover and spillover impacts elsewhere in the community from hotel stays and other business opportunities. But because the city has significant additional financial contributions going into that, both as one-time and ongoing debt service obligations, this is not a profit or a revenue maker for the city of Elk Grove. We see this as an opportunity to do something unique and special and provide an amenity that's also an economic driver for the community and the region.
And Mr. Jacobs, I think we have an interesting question that came in for you from a experienced life of seeing exotic animals of the world. What is the most exotic animal you've had the opportunity to engage with in this planet?
Oh my gosh. There was an Amazon river dolphin at the zoo in Duisburg, Germany, that I got to scratch its belly. It was the last one living in the Western world. I got to touch a platypus in Australia. But, I love interacting with our okapis and our white rhinoceros right here at the Sacramento Zoo. I love what I do. I see the difference zoos make, especially for children. So that was a fun question. Thank you.
Well, it's a fun and amazing world that we have around us, right? And it's even more special to make the connections that can happen, whether it's through a zoo or individual adventures. Digging down into some of our questions, and I think it's I think this goes back, and Mr. Jacobs, I think this comes back into your camp. And it's these assurances, I think, that our residents are looking for with the Zoological Society. One of our residents believes that the current MOU with the city and the zoo requires the Zoological Society to disclose the amount of contributions received for the relocation prior to city approval. Is that a report that's going to be pending, or is that something that is on your schedule? I think maybe is what we're looking for.
Well, we keep the city of Elk Grove informed on our activities, our fundraising activities, obviously. And as the city manager mentioned, there's going to be a larger MOU that's going to be structured with the checks and balances system. So does that answer the question?
I think we're there. I think what we have is a lot of residents that are interested to hear a news drop of info. We are trying to provide information, but we also don't want to jump the gun if the zoo has some big announcements that you're planning for. So
yeah, we're going to talk more about it, as I said, on May 8th. We're really looking forward, and I see the questions. If this individual is interested in donating to the campaign, by all means, we're happy to have additional donations. Every little bit helps us get to where we need to go to build a great new regional zoo for the as a destination.
Well, thank you for that. I'd like to just continue, like so many of the processes at the city. This is just one step in a long journey, and there are ways to provide comment. On the screen, we have displayed that website is really the driver of information. This recording of the webinar will be posted up at that location, along with all the information that we have for the zoo. We'll keep getting pushed to that segment of the city website. And as Mr. Jacobs noted, May 8th, the City Council will be having an item in which they will be another point in time of the new zoo at Elk Grove project that we will be looking into this. And especially for folks, it's a great opportunity to provide comments. That is going to be at our regular meeting on May 8th with the scheduled start time of 6 p.m. But of course, we have that opportunity for open public comment for folks to comment on the new zoo at Elk Grove project, provide comments direct to the council, and you can also provide comments prior to that event. You can send emails, and one of those sources is cityclerk@elkgrovecity.org, as noted on the website or on the display screen. You can also email me directly, and we'll make sure that we get all those items to the city council. So Lindgren@elkgrovecity.org, cityclerk@elkgrovecity.org, and just keep sending us information, because that's really what these processes are. This is for us through going through our governance process to get those assurances, to ask tough questions, and to keep moving forward. And I think it's, I might have mentioned, but these thresholds of confidence, the more that we have information, the more that we can move forward with confidence into the future. And I think I'm just reviewing whether we have any last questions, because where we're at is about 7:49, but let me look one more time. I'm just going to do a quick read over the top over here. And I think, Mr. Behrmann, we do have a question that got thrown in, which is, at this time, is there a name for the zoo? Might be a little early for that.
Sorry, let me hop on here. It is a little bit early. No, the city has not made any decisions yet on the naming for the zoo. We're kind of taking this one step at a time. Next step would be to bring this back to the city council, and then naming will be considered down the road. But it's a great question. It's something that we do get a lot from people, is what is this thing going to be called? And we're definitely going to give careful consideration, as well as listen to what members of the public are interested in seeing as the name for the new zoo. So stay tuned.
I think we already have this webinar dubbed as a Zoom meeting. So maybe there's some kind of sponsorship that we can get from Zoom in that regard. But there was another question that came in, and it is directly about the financing plan that was presented tonight. And it has that ballpark $302 million price tag. And is this the final and only budget for this project? And I think where the question's leading to is, will there be another round of financial documents and budgeting for the future phases as we look at this project going forward? And I believe, Mr. Jordan, you might have some insights in that regard.
Yeah, I can take that one, Jason. So the finance plan that we've presented at this point is just for phases 1A and 1B. The future phases 1C, 2, 3, and 4 will require their own financing plan. Those will be put together at a later date. We want to focus on this initial first 28-acre phase 1A, 1B complex. because it really is getting the core of those facilities in place and provides an opportunity for additional phases to happen over time. A lot of possibilities happen with or could be set up with how those financing plans are put together, but we want to focus on that core piece, essentially that major relocation and operational component for the zoo first, and then we would look at those later. And so, no, we've not contemplated or laid out a strategy for those other phases yet. It also comes down to the level of design. You see in the design plans, we have a certain level of detail across the entire site. And as we get into really the phases 1A and 1B, there's more detail available in those components. And so that's where we've been focusing our design attention. We have ideas for things like California, Australasia that give us the ability to say, oh, here's generally what could happen here, the range of species that could be included. But we don't have all the details exactly worked out. Maybe the education building that's in phase 2, exactly how does that lay out? Similarly, in phase 3, we know there's an office building that covers the sort of back of house administration components of the facility, replaces those modular buildings that would be in phase 1, but we don't have a detail on what that looks like or what those costs would be. And of course, because they're so far out cost-wise, an estimate on those today would really not hold a lot of water long-term. So we're taking this one step at a time and again, focusing on that phase 1A, 1B component.
Thank you for that. And I think all this, the information sharing really is what is the starting basis for dialogue in the community. And so please do stay dialed in at our 3Ws, elkgrovecity.org/zoo. We have the May 8th council meeting coming up. We have opportunities for folks to submit comments and attend the meeting. And again, join us on this journey of many steps as we keep moving forward. I'd like to thank everyone for those that tuned in tonight. Really appreciate your time in coming out and let people know that they can see the recording and hear some of these questions, but also just start the dialogue out in the community and see what are the next steps that are coming up. We really appreciate your time that you took tonight. I'd also like to voice my appreciation to all of our panelists for your time that you took in fielding the questions and being in the hot seat. But I'd also like to give an opportunity as we're getting here to this closeout to the Jasons. And I would be starting with Mr. Jason Jacobs. If he just wanted to say any closing remarks just from the evening's presentation and the items that came forward.
Oh, we're excited about this project and the potential of it. Working with the City of Elk Grove's team has been incredible, and this will be a transformational project. And there's a lot of interest from many people within the community to make this happen. So thank you for everyone's time for tuning in.
I'll just echo that. Really appreciate people tuning in and asking all the questions. This isn't the end of public comment and opportunities, right? We've been at this for a couple of years. There's a lot more left to be had. And so please stay engaged, stay involved, follow online what's going on as we move forward with future city council meetings and other meetings. Please stay engaged in that. Let us know what your questions, what your comments are, whether you're supportive or not to this project. We really value public input, and that's really important, especially for our city council as they weigh the pros and cons of the project and ultimately make the decision on whether to move forward. So they really rely again on that public feedback from members of our community. So thank you for being here, and please talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, direct them to the website, encourage them to come watch this recording, and let them know what's going on with the potential zoo project here in Elk Grove. So thank you.
I think that's a general thank you and good night. And thank you, Mr. Jordan, for running us through the system here and getting us to the finish line.
Thanks, Jason. Good night, everybody.